understand the mystery. First, take a look at the history. The words we use will give us clues. So join us now in Church Chatter.
Welcome to the Church Chatter podcast, where we unpack a different church word or phrase each episode. I'm Sam. I study language and power.
And I'm Dillon. I'm an ELCA Lutheran pastor.
And today we're doing something a little bit different. So we're going to skip the regular stuff we do in the beginning because I have a lot of questions. It's episode 79. I am going to interview Dillon. So today we're going to interview the Reverend Dillon Epler. Dillon is a native of Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania. He has a bachelor's of science in legal studies with a concentration in political science from Central Penn College. He has his master's of divinity from United Lutheran Seminary in Gettysburg. He's the pastor of St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church in Tamaqua, Pennsylvania. He's an avid reader, a lover of history and documentaries, the husband of Samantha Bise, and the father of 2 daughters and a Cocker Spaniel. And today we're going to interview you, Dillon Epler, who rarely talks about himself. He hates it. So let's learn what it's like for Dillon to be a pastor. I'm going to start with a really easy one. What is your favorite part about being married to your wife? I'm just kidding. My first question is, how do you deal with criticism? So a really quick story. I posted this on Instagram, but our daughter the other day, our 5-year-old drew a picture. Our 4-year-old said, "I don't like that." And our 5-year-old cried. And then we had a conversation with her. Do you remember that?
I do.
And we talked to her about how, hey, you know how mommy writes books? Not everybody likes what I write, but I keep writing. You know how you go to church every Sunday and you see daddy and he's talking to people, but then he gives a sermon. Not everybody likes what he has to say all of the time, but you keep doing it anyway, right? So my question for you, Dillon, as a pastor and a person, but as a pastor, how do you deal with criticism? And I'm so curious to hear your answer.
Well, I don't deal with it always the best.
I thought you were just going to say, I don't deal with it, period.
Oh, no, that's the truth. I don't deal with it the best.
Be honest. It doesn't have to be wise. Just be honest.
Yeah, not that I don't like critique, but critique is hard, and so when there's conflict or there's critique or there's something like that, I usually internally think, oh, why is this group or why is this person saying this to me, right? That's what I'm thinking internally, but externally, I really do try to think and say, thank you for sharing that with me. I thank you for sharing that with me. I haven't seen it like that. And I try to respond to the criticism or the critique in kind of an open way. But I don't like it. I don't enjoy it.
But what do you do with it? So somebody says, I can't think of anything, but just somebody says something about like, oh, I didn't like that sermon. Or even, here's a big one that every pastor deals with, right? Somebody who stopped coming to your church, maybe. If somebody stopped coming to your church, that's like a certain kind of criticism. You don't know. Is it about you? Is it about something else? I don't know. Do you just think to yourself, hey, it's all right, and move on? Do you lose sleep at night? Do you talk about it? Do you talk about it with other pastors? Do you go to a therapist? Do you pray about it? What do you do?
Now that I've been doing pastoral ministry for 5.5, almost 6 years now. In the beginning, I had much more trouble with, what do people think, or what? And not that I don't think that still, because I do. But I've come to the conclusion that I can personally get upset about what someone has thought about a sermon, or someone has thought about a decision that I have made, or if an individual or a group or a family is no longer coming. I that hurts me, that upsets me, and yet at the same time, I have also come to um, I really have. I've come to a place where there is a different there's a different place for everyone. So I think of, even in our little town here of Tamaqua, if you don't like our church, well, there are so many other churches where you might feel comfortable. And so my thing is to just hold on. So instead of like create uh, an argument or something like that, I just I try to release those things into the river. That doesn't mean that, and
Ground that for us. I want a real, Dillon, I want you to be vulnerable because you never are. And I think this is helpful because a pastor is such a visible position, and it's almost like a politician where like religion and politics are so divisive, right? And you have just like entered into the divisive world. What do you do? Like, what happens to you when you receive criticism, and what do you do with that? Not just what are your thoughts on it, what happens to you physically and emotionally? Is it
healthy
easy for you to put it down, or
healthy criticism is good. Is good. I do welcome healthy criticism. I do welcome feedback. I don't always enjoy it, but I welcome it. Like if someone tells me that, like, oh, that was like interesting, or I didn't really, I don't really see it that way in your sermon. My first response is, let's go out for coffee.
Mhm.
That is my first response, and that is a genuine
To
response.
go deeper into it, to be like, I want to know more about what you're saying?
Yeah, and one thing that I'm not afraid of, I'm not afraid of, I used to be, but I'm not anymore. I'm not afraid of difference.
No.
I'm not afraid of that. Like, I do not have to have someone on the same page as me to like them, to enjoy them, to hear where they're coming from. I do not.
Even in our marriage, you are, if I criticize you, if I'm like, hey, you keep doing this thing and it is bothering me, like you iron your clothes and you have this mason jar that you fill up with water so you can put it in the iron and you keep putting it on my dresser. Uh, I shouldn't say keep. You kept doing it, and then I said, can you please stop doing that? And then you did it one more time, like a month later, and then you stopped. That's just a small example. But even in our marriage, when I criticize you, even maybe with not the best tone, you are quick to be like, to go into it, to figure out why it bothers me, and then to adjust. And Dr. Orna, who does couples therapy, she defines love, and I really love this. I define love as the art of letting go, right? Of just like, can you have open palms and let the person be who they are? But Dr. Orna has described it as the ability to withstand difference. And you are very good at that. You're very good at that. Yeah.
Well, I try, and so that's the truth. I don't. These are the general things. I don't really enjoy critique or criticism. I don't think most people do, right? So I don't enjoy it right off the bat. However, I welcome it, and I'll even affirm it if there's something that I see that I need to change, or I need to rethink, or I need to like dive deeper into. And I'm okay with difference. I'm okay with the ambiguity of things. I don't need everything to be the same. I actually find that to be quite boring. Um, I don't. I don't need everyone to believe the same exact thing. I think it is good to come around to common values and principles, and we can say, here's kind of a basis where we are, and we can agree on these things. But within those things, there's a diversity. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not so like loosey goosey, like, well, whatever goes. I'm not that, but I do think my first response to somebody that would say I don't agree is let's go for coffee. Because number one, I love coffee, and number two, I do love conversation. I mean, so Samantha offered that I was a legal studies political science major. in college, and I interned and I worked at the state senate for a while, and did some internships in the state house, and also interned at the U.S. Senate, not in Washington, but in Harrisburg. And so, being around politics and seeing how compromise has to happen or should happen, uh, and being in that world for quite some time after college, I see things a little differently. If you want to get things done, or you want to kind of expand to bring more people kind of collaboratively together, you can't be what we call in politics a lot is you can't be a hardliner, you know.
Well, I also think that, which this actually transforms me just witnessing you doing this, but some of my progressive friends, you're not going to like this. You're not going to like this if you're listening, but it's true. As a fellow progressive, it's true. Sometimes what happens on the political spectrum, even in religion, is we demonize the other side, right? That's not a hot take. Everybody knows it. But Dillon sees people in such suffering and vulnerability. And once you do that, and I think that's the magic of a diverse community, but especially in church where you bring your suffering, you hear somebody make a comment that you think is very theologically problematic, right? That they believe someone's going to suffer in hell, or they believe a gay person is sinning, right? Like, you hear these things that I just, at my core, it's not that I just don't believe them. They're part of my identity, that I think it's wrong that someone else believes that way, right? But then Dillon gets to be with these people when their mother dies, when their sister dies, at their funeral, when they die, maybe, when they get the cancer diagnosis, when they get the news that they're being left and divorced, when they just these moments of suffering. When you see someone suffering, all of the other things fall away. Or if you go and you have coffee with that person, you quickly realize, oh, you're a person, and actually there's a story about why you believe that. It doesn't mean that that belief doesn't cause harm, maybe, or isn't distancing you and creating division among us, which is the opposite of what we're called to do. But it does, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, which kind of leads me into my next question. Being your spouse is really interesting, because it's like Rob Bell has talked about this when he was a pastor. It's like we have these circles of influence, right? And at the center is like for me, it's like you and our daughters, right? And then the next circle is like maybe our parents and siblings, and and then you just get bigger and bigger. As a pastor, Dillon goes right to the middle. I mean, right to the middle. He has been in hospital rooms when somebody receives a bad diagnosis, where it's like a 65-year-old and their kids and their grandkids, and then Dillon. Or two people are getting married up at the front, and there's Dillon. Or somebody loses a child, and they're like an adult child. You haven't done a child funeral yet, but like an adult child, and the parents are there and they're grieving, and then there's Dillon at the front of the funeral. Like, he's just like pushed to the center of people's lives. So sometimes, this is what I want to ask. Sometimes it's with church people. I feel like for you, that makes sense. You know these people. You spent half a decade with these people. Some of these people were your teachers when you were children, or your parents' friends, because we live in your childhood community. But you have this, sometimes it's strangers who reach out to you because they just want a pastor, but they don't go to church, or they can't go to church, or they're afraid of church, or whatever it is. And they'll reach out to you because they don't know who else to reach out to. But I see you with strangers, but also with people that you know well, and maybe you've known your whole life. You somehow have this skill where you know when they say something maybe problematic theologically, or something hateful, or something racist, or something like that, right? I don't know, I'm just spewing things out over the long trajectory, even at other churches too. Somehow you know when to soften and offer comfort, and when to challenge and push back. Did you learn that in seminary, or is that just a natural skill for you? I've actually never really asked you. I am inclined to always push back and always be critical and always be like, how, and not critical in a bad way. I think critical in a healthy way. Just like, oh, how did you arrive there? What do you mean? I don't have a comforting personality, but you somehow have both.
Well, I wouldn't say that you don't have a comforting personality, but
I lean more towards the brash side and like the let's just go inside.
yeah,
But
but
go ahead.
there's a beauty to that. Um, and I mean that. So I think as I have evolved as a person, and or grow or have grown or whatever language we want to use, I have tried to open myself up to. I'll take you down a little history lane here. When I went to college, I had roommates and housemates that were so different than me. I came from a small town. I graduated with a graduating class of 100, and I think it was 56 people, not very big. There wasn't much diversity in terms of religion, in terms of culture, in terms of even though Schuylkill County, where we are, where we live, where I've come from, is historically, ethnically diverse, mostly of different European ethnicities. But when I went to college, there was so much a difference. And so that kind of broadened my horizon to try to understand and see that the world's a really big place, and all the things that come with college culture and all of that. You kind of are thinking about that, but then you're studying and you're also having a great and wonderful time. But then you graduate, and then I was just I've always been interested in politics, not even necessarily partisan politics, but politics and how society works. Actually, I would say that I'm actually much more interested in society work than I am politics, even though politics has to do with society. I don't want to get into
What do you mean by that?
so politics can politics is centered on the Greek understanding of polis and people coming together and arranging their lives and doing those things. But what politics has kind of evolved to is either elected or appointed representatives or officials, right? And it's kind of a little bit less become about how do we arrange ourselves societally, and it's pointing to like these like usually when you hear in the news like corrupt politicians, right? And that's not really what I'm really interested in any longer. I'm interested in how societies work, how we get clean water, how we get clean air, how we feed people, and that has to.
Just politics. I think that
Hold
we
on.
should claim that word.
No, yeah, yeah. So listen, so a part of that is politics and electing people to represent us to vote in certain ways to make the world a better place. So that's the politicalness of it. But I'm actually much more interested in the policy end of it. So what kind of policies where you have like group discussions and town hall meetings and people coming together.
Which is politics.
Yes, which is politics, but it's also in political philosophy the way that societies are arranged, which is not totally always linked with partisan politics. So
Right.
they live together, but policy and politics in the field of political science are yes parallel, but they're two different things. So I'm much more interested in societal policy that is affected by politics, and we have to always have that as a part. So
I
the
just don't want to surrender the word politics to corrupt politicians because the political
no,
involves the people and our processes. So
oh
that's
no,
still under the umbrella of politics. I understand what you're saying in political philosophy, how you parcel all those things out semantically. I get it.
I also do not think that all politicians are corrupt. I don't. I actually don't at all. I think there's very
Oh,
admirable.
I mean, we know many of them. You volunteer with many of them. They are hard workers, and they
Wonderful
somehow,
people.
back to our first question, have to make peace with the critique that they're inevitably going to get because when you are a person who takes up any kind of space in the world, you're going to get critique, right? Um, interesting.
So what I'm trying to get at is, so from college to working in politics, and then right before I went to seminary for, I think it was like 5 years or so, um, I worked with at Central Penn College in the residence life and housing office, and hearing young students and where they're at and how they interact with each other and what they're doing made me really reflect on how diverse, once again, the world is, and how people are, and how different cultures handle different situations differently. And so that has allowed me to kind of open myself up to difference. I might not always be on board with what the individual or the group might be proposing or saying or doing, but I understand that they're coming at it from a very different place. That has really, really helped me as a pastor, because I'm dealing with a diversity of different families from different socioeconomic
Mhm.
places that they are. Um, uh,
Yes, really quick, as a pastor, I do find this interesting. We always talk about diversity, 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 which means certain things. The diversity in small towns of wealth that you can have in one congregation is astounding.
yeah.
Think about how much money some people sitting in our space have and how little money others have. And then you have to pastor all of them, and they all have very different ways of doing. Like, that's a really interesting diversity that isn't talked about much, which is socioeconomic
Well,
diversity.
yeah. I mean, for my own congregation that I serve, we have many people who are multimillionaires.
Mhm.
No questions asked. And we
And
also have,
people who have very different ideas of how money should be handled.
right, and we also have people who are literally rubbing two pennies together to try to make ends meet, and they lost their refrigerator, and they had this and they had that, and a pipe burst, and they don't have the money for
And
it, and
medical bills, and they have to
bills,
care
and
for it. Yeah,
they
yeah.
don't they need heating assistance, and so I mean, there is a plethora of diversity just within a little community of like 150 people.
Which I assume is quite common in many churches.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me say that all of that experience has allowed me to try to open up to hear things. But seminary also kind of solidified what was already there,
Mhm.
because the role of the pastor is not to go in and tell people what they need to do or what they should do. That is not the role of the pastor. The role of the pastor is to listen and to be present. And so listening and present is those two things. And to magnify God in Christ, who is that abiding presence with us. So I remember my pastoral theology professor at Gettysburg. She always used to talk about, she was an Episcopal priest, and she always used to
What was her name? Which professor? Remember?
Dr. Storm.
Hmm.
Storm. Um, she always used to say three things. When you go into a room, you are to always have a listening ear. You should be able to sit there and be absolutely silent and just listen. You don't have to offer any words if you don't need to, right? So you're supposed to listen.
That is a skill that you had before.
Yeah. So you are supposed to go in, whether it's to a person's home or if they're in a nursing care facility or something like that, you are to listen to them and hear them, right? And then you are supposed to console them through prayer, console them through words of affirmation that you have heard them, that you listen to them, that God hears them, right? So listen, console, and always magnify God in Christ. As a person of religion, we are supposed to always state that Christ is present with us. That might not mean that we're going to get what we want, but this abiding presence is always with us. So those three things um, are what the pastor is supposed to do. The pastor is not supposed to go in at a time and tell people, well, you have bad theology.
That's not effective either.
That's not effective.
Yeah.
I mean, that is not effective. If you want to do like an adult forum about bad theologies and you want to like do an intellectual instruction on that, sure. But when you're doing
And the people who are open will come.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But when you're doing pastoral care, the role of the pastor that's not an instructive role. That is a listening role, it's a consoling role, and it's a magnifying God and Jesus Christ role. That's the role of the pastor.
Once in a while, when people call you a preacher, I correct them. I say, no, he's a pastor. I cannot stand when pastors are called preachers. Nope. Preaching is part of your job, that you are not a preacher. And people think that your whole job is a Sunday worship service. And I'm going to get a little defensive here as somebody who witnesses your job up close and personal and knows your crazy 50+ hour a week schedule.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane how much you work, how you are pulled in a million directions at once, how we could have plans with our children and suddenly, boom, something happened and now everything has changed.
Right.
And I've made peace with that, but I have not yet made peace with the fact that other people don't understand it, and maybe they never will. But a Sunday service and the sermon, although the sermon I know takes you many hours throughout the week, that's a small portion of what you're actually doing. The number of people who call Dillon every day crying, and we have screaming children in our home, and he has to like go on the back porch or go upstairs to take phone calls while our children are crying or are screaming, and then he's on the phone with someone crying, and then he has to come back and like regulate to take care of children because I've got to go to work or Zumba or wherever I'm going. It's insane, the emotional whiplash of your position and job, and how everything could be fine and we're having a great time and we're at the park with our kids, and then boom, someone calls. And I have phone anxiety as somebody who has addicts in my family, of just like every time the phone rings, it's bad news. And it reinforces it with you because almost every time your phone rings, it's bad news. And I can barely emotionally withstand it. I don't know how you emotionally carry it all the time.
So I want to can I offer something here in terms of in response to the preacher title, or that's just what a pastor does, is preach, right?
Yes.
So when I took my, and this is it's not lengthy, but I think this is, it could be helpful. When I took my ordination vows, I not only took certain vows to uphold as an ordained pastor in the Lutheran Church, but also to follow not only my ordination vows, but also the church's teachings outlined in the Constitution. And so when someone refers to me as a preacher, or someone says, oh, well, what are you preaching on? Now, that's not necessarily a bad question, but when someone just sees the role of a pastor as a preacher, I would like to share what my ordination vows tell me that I am required to do and what I've said yes to. Could I share that?
Mm-hmm.
Could I share that? This is specific to the Lutheran Church and the ELCA, but this is all of which I have vowed to do, and the congregation that I was called to be their pastor requires me to do, and it's the following. And you can listen to this. I don't even know if Samantha ever.
Well, I was there.
Well, yeah, you were there, but that's true. That's true. But that's kind of lost. So it says, every minister of word and sacrament in the Evangelical Lutheran Church shall preach the word and the scriptures of God, number one, administer the sacraments, conduct public worship, provide pastoral care, seek out and encourage qualified persons to prepare for the ministry of the gospel, impart knowledge of this church's teachings and its wider ministry through available channels of effective communication, be a witness to the kingdom of God on earth, in the community, in the nation, and abroad, speak publicly to the world in solidarity with the poor and oppressed, calling for justice and proclaiming God's love for the world, advocating dignity, justice, and equality for all people, working for peace and reconciliation among nations, caring for the marginalized, and embracing and welcoming racially and ethnically diverse populations. Each pastor with a congregational call is required to do the following: offer instruction through teaching, confirm the baptized, marry, visit the sick and distressed, and bury the dead, relate to all schools and organizations of the congregation if they have them, install regularly elected members of the congregational council, and with the council be the administrator of discipline. Endeavor to increase the support of the national church and the synod, and encourage strict adherence to covenantal relationships between the church's constitution, bylaws, continuing resolutions of the national church. That's a lot of shit. And I don't mean that in like, oh, who wants to do that? That's what I promise to do as a pastor in my ordination vows. That's what the congregation has elected me to and the bishop ordained me to do. Not just to preach on Sundays, not just to preach on Sundays, but care for people and administer the church's teaching and marry people and bury the dead and confirm people, baptize people, celebrate Holy Communion, do all of these things. Install people when they're elected to represent certain things, go to the church's synodical and national things.
And the boundaries for a pastor are so interesting because it kind of related to this thing where you serve strangers, but also members of our community. Logistically and institutionally, the people who are at our church give what they can. A lot of people give money. A lot of people give time. They serve on committees to do the work of the church, to serve the community, all these things, right?
A lot of people give great baked goods.
Yeah, baked goods. You donate. And when I've said this on this podcast before, and I say it all the time, but our church, which averages, I don't know, like 80 to 100 people. Your mom is calling me. So after this, we'll call her back. She might call you just.
Yeah, she did.
Okay. I lost my train of thought. Hold on. Oh, when I look around, everybody is giving, right? Because they are contributing to our church community that cares for each other and cares for the greater community with the resources that we have, right? That's what a church is called to do. I would say about a quarter of your labor is for non-church members who are not contributing in any way. And it sounds cold, but also this is your job. And I know that it's a passion and all, like it's a vocation, but a quarter of your time, you are serving people who are not contributing to your salary, who are not contributing to the overall community. That would be like if I had, like, I'm a professor at Penn State, if I had to start tutoring people who don't go to Penn State just because they know that I can. It's very weird. It's very strict.
Well, many
you also feel called to do it. And maybe at some level, our community pays you so that you can still reach some other people, but that group of strangers reaching out to you seems to be getting bigger and bigger. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, it's absolutely bigger and bigger because less people are contributing in a multitude of ways. So we usually talk about it as through time, talent, or treasure, which means like giving of your time, or like if you have certain talents, you give your talents, or you might give your treasure because you might have the means, monetary means to give. So there's many different ways of giving, like Samantha said, but increasingly.
Can I say something really quick to ground what I was trying to say, which is with great empathy and sympathy and love and kindness, people want the services of a pastor, but increasingly people want the services of a pastor who is the leader of a community without the burden of community. And I think that's actually a generational issue with millennials and younger, because in the older generations, I don't see it as much. We want the benefits of community, but we don't want the inconvenience and annoyance of community, which comes with it, by the way. Like if you want, you know what I mean? Okay, so keep going. Keep it going.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get into volunteerism too much, but and the world was very different years ago. But but church was a place where people would gather and people would volunteer. Now we have a society that that makes that a little bit more difficult, and so there's some things there. But what was your original question again? Oh, the preacher part. So,
Yeah.
I know that I read those long ordination vows and those long, that long list of affirmations in our church's constitution that I am required to uphold. And I know that might seem like, oh my God, that is so boring. But why I did that was, and read those things and elaborated on it, is because the pastor, of a congregation in almost all Christian traditions is not just a preacher. Preaching is important. Preaching is instructive. Preaching has always been a tradition of the church, but a pastor is not just a preacher. They are called to do many more things than that.
That's so good. I have really strong opinions, as you know. Now, I know my pastor. I'm married to him, so I know that makes a difference. And for me, that I am, what a privilege. It makes me feel so safe because Dillon and I just happen to agree on just about everything. So that's really helpful for me. However, what I love about being Lutheran, specifically in a small town, is the majority of the members of our church have grown up there, and even their parents did, and now their kids who are young adults are coming back. And I love that for this community. I love it so much. And this is true for many mainline Protestants, I think, too, and Catholics. It doesn't, and Orthodox, I don't know, lots of churches.
Mm-hmm.
It does not actually matter what Dillon says up there. They're not going anywhere. And I love that. Like, it does matter. Sermons matter. But for these people, I take such issue, so much so that I'm writing a book about this issue, as Dillon knows. But I take such issue when people are like, I don't like what the pastor said, so I'm leaving. What power you're giving to one person. That's really interesting because the community is so much more. And in our church, the sermon is 10 to 15 minutes once a week out of an entire thing that the pastor is offering you here. Now, if the pastor's really mean to you or has certain beliefs, like, you can all have lines in the sand, right? But some people are just like, I didn't like that one thing, I'm done. And I love that our church, there have been people who have come out and said, like, it doesn't matter what happens. We could have no pastor here. I'm not leaving. This is my church and I'm not leaving. Or if there's like an argument with somebody else, this is my church. I'm not leaving. Dillon tells people regularly, this is your church. You keep coming back. It doesn't matter if you're having a disagreement with that person. We're going to figure it out and hash it out. This is your church. You keep coming back. And our church believes that. And I love that. I don't like when people just hear one thing from the pastor during one sermon and like, I didn't like that, I'm gone. Where's your sense of commitment? Again, there's certain things, sure. But okay, so let's get to a couple more really interesting questions that I want to know. What theological belief has become more important to you over the years? To situate it, because I don't know that you'd offer this information, but I think it's important. Like all of us, Dillon was more hot-headed in his 20s. Dillon had political and theological beliefs, and when I first met him, I say hot-headed, there wasn't a temper to it. There wasn't even an anger to it. You like to debate. You used to like to debate. When somebody said something that you didn't agree with, you were like, let's go. You don't do that anymore. You don't have that. That has fallen away. But theologically, is there a belief that maybe you didn't care about as much, but now it's very important to you? And by the way, that's normal. I think all of us were more intense in our 20s trying to figure out who are we. And then in our 30s and 40s, we back down a little.
I think a theology that I have really leaned into much more, or put more emphasis on, because I haven't really thought about it before, is what was Jesus's actual teachings? Were they about escaping to go somewhere else to a better place, or were they about making this place that we have here better so that once we do die, because we will all die, that we can hope and trust that we can see a place that, once again, we hope and trust that will be a better place. So it's not about like, oh well, the world is going to hell in a handbasket, and we're just waiting for Jesus to come back or us to die so that we can go to heaven. Jesus's teachings were tactile. They were contextual. They were practical
They
about.
were fleshy, they were earthy, they were here.
He was hanging out with people on the margins of society, and calling out societal reform, political reform, religious reform of his own faith, of Judaism, and trying to bring about what the Jewish people have called for centuries the kingdom of God on earth. Right. That does not mean that he neglected kind of a reuniting with God in the afterlife and stuff like that, and I affirm that. But these days, I am very, very interested in a theology that's really based in the Lord's Prayer in particular, and the Beatitudes, and the Ten Commandments. Honestly, those three things: the Ten Commandments, the Beatitudes, and the Lord's Prayer, that speak about God's kingdom coming to earth as it is in heaven. So, number one, it first almost requires you to believe that there is something greater. There is a type of heaven. There is something greater. There is something better. There is something where you can unite with God both here and after you die. So you're affirming that. I affirm that. But how can we start to witness that here on earth? That is really where I didn't think about that before, especially before seminary. Religion always, like societal things were societal things for me. So like politics and arrangement of society, that was one thing. And then religion just took care of like spiritual things. And that is true. About getting
Christianity's become overly spiritualized, where it's like it's always about escaping somewhere else.
Getting you to heaven somewhere in the sky, right? And
Yeah.
so actually, if you read Jesus's teachings, um, the Jewish understanding of Jesus's teachings and Jesus's reforms are clearly about reorienting ourselves here on earth, and trusting the promise that once we die, we go back to be with God. Full stop. Full stop. What Christianity, unfortunately, has really kind of embraced is kind of a Greco-Roman understanding of philosophy and religion, where the earth is totally separated from the heavens, and then we go off after we die up to some kingdom in the sky. And I'm not negating that imagery. It can be hopeful and helpful for a lot of people, and I don't want to take that away from them. But those visions can also be seen here on earth. And once again, the Ten Commandments, the Beatitudes, and the Lord's Prayer kind of solidify that. And I want to leave it on this one thing. There's the story of Zacchaeus. And if any people that listen to our podcast went to Sunday school, there's this little song. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he, and he climbed up in a sycamore tree, right? And it goes, and the Lord he wanted to see. So Jesus comes to this man named Zacchaeus, comes to his house. Jesus didn't yet die. And Jesus says, salvation has come to your house this day. Now, everybody thinks about salvation as something that you receive after you die, right?
And not even something that you receive, but something you must achieve.
Right, or something that you must earn or achieve or something like that. And Jesus comes into Zacchaeus' house and he says, salvation has come to your house today, right? There was no death. There was no bloody sacrifice. There was a rearranging. Jesus was calling, he's saying, my message from God is that salvation, that you don't have to live like you've been living any longer here on earth. And if you can, bless you, and if you can recognize it here on earth, then once you do go on after death in the hereafter, you will fully be able to recognize it, right? So that's the long answer of I'm really where I have evolved with a theology is a theology of heaven on earth, so that we can fully embrace heaven when we die. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. I'm sorry for all the blowing my nose and sneezing, but all the smoke here
All
because
the smoke, yeah.
wildfire in Canada, Pennsylvania, we're struggling. I don't know how they're doing it in Canada.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, my next question is what theological belief has become less important to you over the years? What used to really matter to you that now it just has fallen away?
Um, Two things. Um, the first would probably be the question of why did Jesus have to die? That's a question that many people answer. It's what we would call in the church an atonement question, meaning that atonement meaning atone, meaning bringing something back. Why someone has to why did this happen?
To be
Uh,
out once again, to bring
yeah,
unity.
to kind of bring cohesion. Um, I've come to the conclusion that for centuries, different groups of people within the rather large Christian tent have always seen Jesus's death in a little bit of a different way, even in the four
In a
Gospels.
little bit, people
Well,
have wildly
yeah.
vast beliefs
So
about
so I
Jesus' death.
so I people that want to argue about atonement theories or question that, well, there's only one atonement theory, I think that's a waste of time. I think people can understand Jesus's death in many different ways, as long as they, if you're a Christian, as long as you're keeping central that Jesus did die for a meaning, for a purpose, for something. How that happened and why that happened, there's many different ways of understanding that. So I have put that aside and I focus on Jesus died, and I have my own personal belief about that and why that happened and how that happened and yada yada. But I'm less worried about, well, there's only like one or two correct ways. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's the first thing. Atonement theories. I'm not overly interested in
Can I
that.
just stop you really quick so we
Yeah.
can hash this out? Because it's something that keeps coming up for you and I in conversation over and over again. So I post a lot on Instagram, obviously, and people on the weekly basis will message me things like, I mean, I've gotten the question, why did Jesus have to die? First of all, I
Mm,
talk about Christian language. I don't get into well, I kind of do whenever it touches the language. But what a weird question. I mean, my answer tends to be, oh, he didn't have to.
mhm.
He was murdered by the state, by the Roman Empire. But also, I get questions like, I'm looking for a church community. I live in Wyoming. Can you help me find a church where everybody's going to be really kind and there's not going to be conflict, and so and everyone's going to be affirming of this, that, and the other thing. And um I don't know why people, so here's the thing that keeps coming up for you and I again, and what you just said touches on it. Purity culture. People want this pure Christianity. They want Christian communities to be pure and perfect and utopian. And it's such a strange expectation to put on people.
Mhm.
I think that it's okay and wonderful and beautiful to want to be safe in a church community. That's a valid question. And you need to enter into negotiation with yourself of what do I need to feel safe and how can I validate that this space will actually be safe and at what point do I no longer feel safe and I have to leave? Define those things for yourself. We all have them. But to think that you're going to enter a community of human beings where there will be no conflict, where everyone's going to agree on the same thing theologically, everybody's going to have the same political beliefs, everyone's going to have the same, that's crazy. You want purity. Or to think that the Christian faith and Christian theology, there's one right way to believe. There has never been one right way. And if you're searching for this like untainted, like as someone said to us recently, like, yeah, well, I'm paraphrasing, but like God's truth, and then man gets a hold of it, right? Humanity, they said man, which I hate, but man gets a hold of it. Well, how else would it work? How else would humans receive theology? In the mess of negotiating, what the hell does this mean, right? We're meaning making machines. You want it just to arrive pure. You want God just to whisper in your ear, here's the truth of everything. Here's what it is. Well, then what is the point of being here in this earthly experience if we just know everything? That sounds miserable. What would we explore? That's crazy. And that's purity culture rebranded. So anyway, go on. That's kind of what you were talking about right there. It was
Yeah,
like this
yeah.
thing, and it keeps coming up for you and me over and over again. We keep having conversations. Everybody wants this pure Christianity. It doesn't exist. Okay, go ahead. What's the second thing?
Yeah. So the first thing would be I've given up on either the church or myself having a one capital T true atonement theory on why Jesus died. There's a multitude of different understandings of that, and all maybe not all, but most of which are very valid. And I learned in seminary almost all of them. Right.
Some of them cause harm, and some of
That's
them,
why I said not all.
yeah.
um, so, and then my second thing that I place a lot less emphasis on these days. I'm around a lot of people who have died.
Like before you were around them before they died?
Yeah, dying people, and then
Oh.
so people who are dying, actively
Mm-hmm.
dying,
Mm-hmm.
and then also with them them at their funeral where they are dead, and being with their grieving families.
Mm.
And I used to think that it was before I went to seminary. I used to think that it was the role of the pastor. Once I'm pointing back to what I said a little bit earlier, it was the pastor's role to explain things,
Mm.
explain death, explain the why, explain uh, the this and the that, explain the theology of the church, right? And I have been around so many dying people and the grieving families and those who have died that I keep going back to what my pastoral theology professor, Dr. Storm, said at Gettysburg is, I am there to listen and to console and magnify God and Jesus Christ as present with us, right? So my emphasis, what I used to think was the emphasis of, well, where do you go when you die? And what will heaven look like? And how long will it take? And do I go there right away? Or do I have to wait? Or do I have to repent? Is there kind of a process of that? All of those questions aren't bad questions.
The question you get the most often is, where are they? Where's
Yes.
one?
Where is my loved one? And the simple not answer but response I can give is that we trust that they are at peace and back to where they have come from.
That's so good because you can't say the truth, which is
So
nobody really knows
So
exactly what happened.
the answer is yes, there's many near-death experiences, and people come back from them and share those mostly beautiful experiences that they have, and that's something to pay attention to, don't get me wrong. But the mystery of death is just what I said. It is a mystery. None of us know the complexities and the diversities within it. None of us know. We have stories that we have created that God has spoken through us, that has helped us to be able to give us hope and trust and comfort and peace and grace and love and all those churchy words, right? Um, and has kind of built a framework for us to help us. But at the end of the day, when someone is dying, or I'm with a family of the dead, the simple answer that I can give with truth is that um, we go back to where we are and who we've come from. So we go back to God, and we go back to that place where God is, and we trust that there is peace there. Those are the only things that we can hope for, right? When
And
we're
it's
getting
actually all that the grieving people need.
it
To get
is it
into the
is
weeds, it's not the time.
once you start to try to explain things or answer exactly, you are in trouble. You are in trouble. You're actually on
Well,
a
the early church fathers, they said
oh
blah blah. Like
no.
there's a time and a place for that, and it's not with grieving.
Right, as Jesus would say, if you start, I'm putting together two things here, but Jesus would say, if you're starting to do things like that, you are on sinking sand. You are on sinking ground. You are not on a firm foundation.
Mhm.
So I would say less concerned about exactly why Jesus died specifically, just that he died, and there's many understandings of that, and much less understanding of the details about what heaven may be or what the afterlife may be, and focusing more on trust of peace and going back to where we have come from with God.
That's good.
Plain and simple.
Well, my last question is, what part of the liturgy means the most to you?
Oh. um,
You love liturgy.
I do. Oh, I do. Um, Oh, that's so hard because I really do. I love it all. But honestly, when it
It's
comes,
kind of like saying a question that I was going to ask you, but I didn't. But this, it's equally as flawed. The liturgy all works together. It's kind of
yeah,
like asking, "What's your favorite verse in the Bible?" The cherry picking, it's a whole story arc. I can't just pick like a line. It's a whole story arc that we're drawn into. So just picking a line is hard.
I can answer this though.
Okay.
I can answer this. I love. It'll do a two-part here. I love the liturgy. So I love the liturgy in its entirety. Okay,
Mhm.
from the gathering to the sending. Okay, and the word and the meal in between. Right. I love all of it. However, as a pastor who does have to preach and does have to throughout the week really kind of wrestle and think about and do research on the assigned texts, the assigned Bible readings, and craft a sermon around that kind of intellectual slash spiritual exercise I love, but it takes out a little bit of the humanity for me in it, and the connection of I do believe that God speaks through stories, including stories in the Bible. So I believe that, and that's a part of the liturgy. But honestly, I love the Eucharist. I love. Sorry, our dog is shaking down here. I love the Eucharist. Why do I love it? Well, I love it for a lot of reasons. We could be here hours of me telling you about why I love communion, the Holy Communion, the Eucharist. But the Lutheran Church affirms that the Eucharist is, it remains bread and wine, and yet Christ is fully present with that bread and wine. So it's not just bread and wine; it is Christ's true presence, and I truly trust that. And so I believe that every single week.
What's really interesting about interviewing you is you tell so few personal stories. You just go to like the heady, like, here's what I think about it. But so you say that you trust that it's the presence of Christ. What does that do for you?
When I receive communion, so I don't take communion myself.
Nobody takes communion.
When I receive communion, you are correct. When someone administers communion to me and I receive it, usually the person who is assisting me in worship, when I eat the bread and drink the wine, this is weird because I'm not good with personal stories. There is it actually makes me a little bit emotional. I have to do nothing for that. That bread and wine show up at the table. Yes, it's bought, but that bread shows up at the table. There are special prayers that I pray over it for everyone. And within those prayers, I believe that bread and wine are united with the fullness, with the trueness of Jesus Christ. And so when I take that bread and drink that wine,
receive that bread and receive that wine.
Receive that bread and receive that wine. I get this is the God's honest truth. I get butterflies every time.
But why is that meaningful to you that you don't have to earn it? Why does that matter to you?
Because I don't have to do anything. I do a lot. I do enough. So receiving that from someone else who's giving it to me and believing that it is the true presence of Christ, I didn't have to do any good works for that. And every time I take it, which is every Sunday, receive it.
I'll never stop.
I have a moment. And not everyone has that moment. That doesn't do it for everyone. I think it can, but it doesn't for some people. And that's the part of the liturgy that I love. I love the prayers. I love the chanting. I love the dialogues back and forth.
I find that if you are on the other end of the communion equation and you are helping facilitate as a communion assistant, communion can change in meaning for you. And just, I think I've said this on here before, but like if you think about your church, and if there's a person whose energy just doesn't jive with yours, it's like you just find them downright annoying. When you are on the other side and you are placing the bread in their hands,
or for them to receive.
Yeah, you're placing it in their hands. Yeah. It's very vulnerable to be like, oh, everybody's at this table, which is to say everybody is worthy of the greatest capital L love imaginable. Even the people who annoy the shit out of me, even the people that I cannot stand, which is with humility true for me too, right? Of like, when there is somebody who is communion assistant who I know that like, when we were in that committee meeting, I said some things they didn't agree. And I know that we didn't leave like on the best, like, hey, you're my best buddy terms. But now they are placing the bread in my hands and facilitating it. It feels very vulnerable. If you can sink into that awareness, like it's for everybody, even the people who you wouldn't invite to your table. This is a table for everybody. And if we can take that ethic out into the world, it really is transformative.
Well, right. And Paul, the Apostle Paul, St. Paul speaks about this. He speaks about going to the table unworthily. And what he means by that is that's been translated and really mistranslated, I should say, over the years. But what he is saying is don't go to that table. Don't go to that table thinking that you're better than other people or that you have the right way. If you're going to it in an unworthy manner, then you should think about that before you go and think that like you're better than other people, or you're going to like push to the front, or you think that people are unworthy to go.
Well, and Paul is talking from the Greco-Roman understanding, and communion, the Eucharist, is modeled after the ancient banquets and associations where people would be reclining, right? Which is why we get, I forget what book it's in, but essentially Jesus is reclining and one of his disciples is at his heart, right? Because they used to lay down. But at Jesus banquets, at Jesus associations, and early Jesus communities that have evolved into churches, in the Greco-Roman world, people who are of higher status and have more money and wealth, they got to recline. Enslaved people, women, people with less wealth, they either weren't there at all, or they were there and serving, or if they were there, they had to sit on a chair. At Jesus associations, which evolved into church and the Eucharist as we know it today, they didn't do that. So when Paul is saying, no, you all go unworthy, that's saying nobody gets a special position at this table just because you think that you're more important. Nobody in this community is more important than the other. I don't care how much money you have. Actually, in these communities, and we get this from Paul as well, if you have more wealth, you are responsible for feeding more people. You bring more wine, more bread, more money, more whatever the community needs. If you have more, you give more. Which is where tithing, part of the tithing equation too, is like 10%. If you have more money, that means you're giving more money. This is radical. This is really radical. Anyway, let's go back to you. So
All right,
all of
so
that feels very personal to me.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so I love all parts of the liturgy, but my favorite is the meal or the Eucharist. I experience something personal every time I receive the Eucharist. I really do. I get kind of tingly, or I get like butterflies in my stomach when I receive that. And I believe that there's a uniting between the presence of Christ and myself. I feel like there's a true connection there, right? And I trust that every time that happens, that Christ shows up. I also am gonna maybe you might want to ask another question. I don't know. Okay, but when I was a young child, a young boy, and even into my teenage years, I was brought up religious. And I remember, especially as I got older, I would say to my parents, more my mother in particular, but I will not believe in Jesus unless I see him. I will not believe. I don't believe. I don't believe it. And my mother would say the same thing to me, offer you the same story. And for years, I always generally believed that there was a God, right? You know, that there was a God, kind of in an agnostic way. Like I don't really know what it might be, but there's some type of God, out there. And I believed that it was kind of active in the world through, kind of a spirit or the Holy Spirit. I could get on board with those two things. But Jesus, I just thought that, Jesus was a historic guy who had some good teachings. But unless he really showed up, I just don't get it. I don't believe it. I don't believe this, Um, and as I got older, I realized that Jesus wasn't going to show up in the flesh um, in front of me. And I wanted to believe. I wanted to trust so bad in this Jesus guy, this old first century Jewish rabbi and social reformer who had great teachings. But I really wanted to see him. Well, now I do see him every Sunday in bread and wine. He shows up in a physical way, and that is my way. I'm not saying that needs to be others' way, but that is my way of saying yeah, this guy's presence is still alive, still coming every time to give us strength to continue his teachings. I'm speaking deeply from my personal understanding of this. And so every Sunday or every time I go out to the homebound and I give them communion, I see Jesus showing up, the risen Christ, that is, physically in bread and wine, something that I can touch, something that I can taste, something that I can see, something that I can smell, something that's tangible. It's not just bread. Mm-hmm. It's not just wine. It's earthly elements that have united with that of a living God in Christ. And so for me, that wish, that hope when I was a little boy and a teenager of I won't believe in Jesus unless I see him, for me, came true in the Eucharist. And that's what, hold on. And that's why I love it so much. And when I was in seminary, what really, really solidified that for me, now I won't share this with most people because it's dry and boring, but Saint Ignatius of Antioch, one of the early church writers, or they would call them the fathers, Saint Ignatius of Antioch wrote about how the Eucharist transformed him to meet Jesus. He never met Jesus, but he meets him every time he receives or celebrates as a priest. He was a priest. He was actually a bishop. The Eucharist. And once I read that and started understanding it in that way, it totally changed for me. And I'll leave us on St. Paul on a St. Paul note. St. Paul gets a bad rap sometimes for a good reason, but St. Paul says to the Corinthians, he says, I'm paraphrasing, the bread we break, is it not the body of Christ that we share? Is this cup not the blood of Christ that we share? And so he's not just saying, oh, well, this is just some little memorial meal that we remember Jesus. No, he's saying the risen Christ comes to us with this bread and wine, and we experience something. We experience the trueness, the realness of the presence of Christ. And so
I'm always struck, as somebody who studies like language related to Christianity, how much, like if I think of myself 15 years ago, who was just not in the Christian world at all of this would have sounded crazy to me. But then once you're in it, like people say, once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? It all makes sense to me, but I'm also hearing it through the ears of me 15 years ago and some other people, and how crazy it sounds because language fails us where experience kicks in and there's a deeper knowing. I'm about to say some really heretical things, but this is what would have been helpful for me, right? If this sounds go ahead.
I just want to say this one thing. As a young child, for a time, my parents had gone to a church that just believed in the what we would call a memorial understanding of the meal of the Eucharist, right? Mm-hmm. And even then, in that church's official teachings, they didn't believe that it was the real body and blood of Christ. They believed it was a remembrance meal. Even then, when I was taking that little grape juice, because they didn't do wine, grape juice, and that little cracker, that little wafer, I felt something. I felt something as a child. I felt like this was a connection, right? And I didn't connect that with still my firmness. I need to see Jesus in the flesh in order to believe him, because I won't. And that's what kind of evolved. That's what got me there.
Yes.
And I know that seems crazy. I mean,
okay. Crazy. But this is the heretical thing that I want to say. Yeah, to some it could sound crazy. But why is, like, so here I made a list. Here are some things that come up for me. But these things for some people aren't crazy, but what you're saying would be. And I think they're so similar, right? There are stories because you went to seminary in Gettysburg, right? And if you live in Pennsylvania or around the area, Gettysburg, huge battlefield, right? And I took a ghost tour there. I don't know, I was like 20 and I went with some friends. There was a ghost tour, and there's this story where somebody went to the gift shop a long time ago, and there were a bunch of bullets because there were so many bullets there, right? So
Right.
they bought a bullet. It was a real bullet shell or whatever. And they put it in their car and they put it in the glove box and they forgot about it. But they would be driving and they would see this soldier in their back seat, right? Because the spirit of this soldier, this is how the story goes, was like attached to this bullet. But they would like just get like a quick glimpse and see this soldier. I don't know if it was Union Confederate, I'm not sure, but a
Right.
soldier in the back seat. And they would like get spooked, but you know how you do whenever you see something that you isn't, it was like, oh, whatever. And then eventually, a few months later, they took this bullet into their house. And in the room where this bullet was, they would do the same thing. They would see this soldier. And then eventually they made a connection. I don't know if it was just one person or a family or a couple or what it was or roommates, but they made the connection and they took the bullet back and returned it and said, we don't want this anymore. And the people at the gift shop said, yeah, this has been returned multiple times because people are saying the same thing. So we hear stories like that, and most of us, I think, have a certain opening to it of like, yeah, maybe there's a spirit attached to this object that is a bullet, that is metal, that is an earthly element, it's kind of thing, right? I also think about some of us, like I have a necklace and a ring that belong to both of my grandmothers. When I put them on, I do feel a certain presence, not to the degree of the bullet, like it's not like I'm seeing them in an embodied way, but you feel a certain presence, right? Or some people will keep the ashes of their loved one and they'll be like, "Oh, my husband's right there." You know full well it's not your husband, and at another level it is. Do you
Hmm.
know what I mean?
Hmm.
At another
Hmm.
level. I'm not saying that equates exactly to what the Eucharist is, but I'm just saying we hear stories like that. We're like, yeah, I like to wear this scarf. It was my great grandmother's. She made it herself, and I just feel her presence when I wear it. A lot of us are comfortable saying things like that, but as soon as it's the bread and wine, it's like, no, 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 because it's part of the church. But it's the same thing, right? We receive communion, and there's this presence in it that we can't quite understand. Maybe not in the same way. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, and it's the same thing with the true presence of Christ being united with water in baptism. And let me say this: there, some people might want to argue, and that's fine. They could do that. There's nothing heretical about what you just said. And you don't need me to tell you that. You don't need me to tell you that. But I'm just saying there is nothing. That is actually a beautiful example
Well, people
of,
don't like equating things
of
like
a
the Eucharist.
sure, I
Yeah.
get that. Well, you know what? Get over yourself. I think that is beautiful. I think that's not heretical at all. I just don't understand. For me, and everybody has a difference. And going back to what I said earlier, I believe I genuinely try to live it out. Difference is good and it's okay. If you think that it's just a memorial meal and that does it for you, beautiful, right? But for me, I just can't, that doesn't do anything for me. Um, and so there is something the divine has and always has been united with earthly things. Sometimes specifically earthly things. Not that it can't be in anything, because it can, but sometimes communities have said it's specific things. That's what they have arranged that around. And so for me, the Eucharist in the liturgy is my favorite part because I experience, I not only trust actually, I experience something happening every time, every time. Um, and it feels so juvenile, but
There's also something meaningful about the fact that at our church, young kids can receive
oh,
communion.
absolutely.
Pretty much as soon as you can do it, you are eligible, if that's the word you want to use, like you can do it. And there's something really moving about, now she just turned 4 and then our oldest is 5, but their tiny little hands,
Oh, it's precious.
and then they come up. And by the way, if you are somebody who receives communion and you do those pinchy fingers, you reach out for it, stop doing that. don't do that anymore. And just feel how that posture feels when you put your hand out to receive it. Because again, we do not take communion. You cannot take grace and love. You can only open your palms and receive it. So when you go to the table, no matter how you receive communion, unless you're like Orthodox and it's placed on your tongue, or some Catholics, I think, do that, which is fine too. That's receiving, but open your hands. And when you see a little kid's little hands and they just have like the cupped palm, there's something deeply moving about it of like, yeah, you don't have to have the right theology and believe the right. What I'm realizing right now is we should do a whole episode on the Eucharist and how meaningful it is. I think that that's what we should.
Well, you'd have me there. And what has again, I could talk for hours about this, but and this sounds so ridiculous and corny, but I'm being vulnerable and personal, which is hard for me. Uh, the Eucharist um, has been a dream come true for me from being a little boy. Um, and
Because you're actually experiencing something
I'm
instead of
actually
thinking about it.
experiencing. It's these aren't just old stories any longer that I have to like live out. Although that's important, not negating that, but but going back to I want to experience and see Jesus in a real way here and now. Um, the Eucharist has been a dream come true for me because for me that has fulfilled that hope and that wish and that longing to experience Jesus, the risen Christ. And so, yeah, that's been a journey for me.
Well, this has been fun. I have a lot more questions to ask you. Maybe some other time in like the winter we'll do a part two or something.
Yeah, that's fun. I look forward to interviewing you and
Cool.
asking you lots of good questions.
Yeah. Actually, I think that, I mean, we've been doing this podcast for over 2 years now. I think two
Yeah,
years. And I think that we did like a Sam interviews Dillon, Dillon interviews Sam kind
we
of thing
did.
a while ago, but we do have some new listeners. So,
Mhm.
all right, stay
Yep.
curious.
Stay curious.
To understand the mystery, first take a look at the history. The words we